My name is Chris Heidenberg. I'm the lead pastor of Found Church. If after this service you're wondering where you can find the current series in its entirety, you can find it online at rufound.com or on our Found Church Facebook page. We welcome you into our family, and we look forward to the opportunity to connect with you. We would love to see you or meet you as soon as we're able to worship together again, hopefully sometime soon, at the middle school at Parkside at 10 a.m. on Sunday mornings. In the meantime, we pray that this worship experience will help you to find faith in God, find freedom for your soul, and find a love that will transform your life. Thanks for joining us. It's a picture of Jesus, and surrounding him were a group of kids. And I never really thought about this as a child, but it looks like Jesus was a white man. And it looks like all those kids around him were white kids. And again, it never really stood out to me. But we all understand that Jesus isn't actually white, right? I mean, we know that. We know that just locationally, geographically, there is no way that he could have been a white man. But yet, all the things that we see, the pictures we see, the movies that we've always seen, they've all depicted Jesus as a white savior. Now, the truth is, it's not our fault that we see Jesus as a white man. Like for whatever reason, every time I picture Jesus in my head, I picture him as a white man. And it's not my fault. It's just because the way that the gospel spread from the Middle East and it took root in like Asia Minor, which is like the southern part of Europe, and then it spread, and it actually like grabbed hold in the European region first. And so naturally, Jesus was presented as this white savior. And so it's not my fault that I see him that way. It's not your fault that you see him that way. It's just because that's what's happened. I remember when God first called me to plant a church, when he first put that seed in my heart and that seed began to grow to plant a church, I had to process through what that even looked like. It wasn't on my radar to plant a church at all. I had zero intention of it. But as that seed began to grow, and I finally came to the point, my family and I, we were able to process through what this could look like together, and we were all on board, and we said, okay, God, let's do this. I'm ready. And as I've said before, I have a lot of ambition in my heart, and so naturally it began to excite me. But the truth of the matter is, I had no clue what to do, no idea how to plant a church. The one thing I did know is that I assumed I needed to know what I needed to do. If anybody was going to look to me to lead this thing, I had to have a plan. And so I started putting things out there, like just having these strategy dreaming sessions in my head and just trying to formulate some sort of plan to put this thing together. And I kept coming up against roadblock after roadblock after roadblock. And finally got to a point where I said, God, I'm not even sure, did I really even hear you correctly? Could this really be what you're asking me to? Because aren't you supposed to be along the ride with me? Aren't you supposed to be the one kind of showing up and showing me what to do here? And finally got to a point where I said, okay, I just throw my hands in the air, God, this has got to be you. You've got to do this thing. And the point is that I was trying to do this thing instead of just responding to something God was going to do, and I just got to play a part of it. So as soon as I got myself out of the way, things started happening. God started showing up. God started speaking in a very real way, and it was amazing. And so the vision started to come, and as that vision started being planted in my heart, I heard him say, I'm calling you, not me specific, but you, all of you. This church that is going to become a church, I'm calling it, her, I'm calling this church to knit a community together. And I didn't like that word knit, mostly because I've never knit in my life. Not that long ago, we were planning a series, and I was going to title a series, The Needle and Thread, and somebody said, you realize you don't have a needle with knitting or thread. You have some long spiky thing that you can impale people with in these balls of color. And you weave them together. I don't know. It just didn't make sense to me. And so I just really had to lean in on him. What does that even mean? I don't even know what that means. And he just quickly showed me. There's so much beauty in this community, and none of it's together. None of it's working together. We're working as each individual ball of yarn, and we're not working together. There's maybe not necessarily as much hatred as there once was, maybe, but we're still separate. And so what we're doing is we're calling these divisions together. And those divisions clearly represent in economic form, they represent in political form. They represent in all kinds of different forms. But let's just be honest, the primary division, you would think that this can't be so, but it's still race. It's still the color of our skin. And so it's not your fault that you see Jesus as a white man, because that's the only thing we've known. But at a certain point, we have to begin understanding and digging into the reasons why. There's an old phrase that we all know. We've all used it a million times. It's a phrase called ignorance is bliss. And ignorance is bliss. I believe that is truth. I mean, ignorance is bliss for that young child that, all they need to care about is I cry when I need to eat, I cry when I need to sleep, I cry when I need changed, and everybody else does everything. And so for a baby, ignorance is bliss, because they don't realize how much sacrifice it takes for a mom to have that bottle prepared, or to have that diaper to change, or to have that space available. For the baby, that ignorance is bliss. But for the mom, it comes with some cost. It comes with some sacrifice. For that teenager, ignorance is bliss when you know that you have to be to all these places and you don't understand the difficulty and the sacrifice it takes your parents to run you all over this entire country, it seems like some days. So when they're home digging through the fridge because they're hungry and they're saying they need to go here and they need to do this and they need to go there, ignorance is bliss to them. For the recipient of that ignorance, it is always bliss. But for the one on the other end of that, it's not always blissful. For that child that walks into Disneyland for the first time, Disney World, and they see that castle, and they see all of those princesses they've loved, or Goofy or Mickey, and they think, man, this is amazing. This is the best day ever. This is the greatest place on earth, the happiest place on earth, but they don't realize even the financial burden, the cost that it took for those parents to get them there, because it literally, I think for a family of 5, you won't get out of there for less than $5,000. It is not cheap. It's a sacrifice. It costs a great deal of money. It costs a great deal of time. And to be honest with you, when that parent is just biting their tongue, trying not to yell and scream at their child because they're throwing a tantrum, or yell and scream at the other parents, the other 100,000 parents that are in that place trying to contain their kids and their screaming, it is not the happiest place on earth. It seems like ignorance is bliss, but ignorance is not always bliss. It's blissful for the recipient or the beholder, but not always for the recipient. The truth is that statement, that's not even actually how that goes. Ignorance is bliss. That's not how it was written. It was actually written by a man named Thomas Gray, and he says, I don't just know that, just so you know, like I don't have that information in my head trying to fool you, make you think that I actually am a smart person. I had to research that, okay? I typed in ignorance is bliss, and this guy's came up, and I'm like, I didn't even realize this. It ties in even better with the message. But it actually says where ignorance is bliss, it is folly to be wise. Because sometimes where things are set up to continue, and it seems blissful to just maintain that status quo. And as soon as you start coming up against that, where you realize maybe you're not so ignorant anymore, and you begin trying to expose that ignorance for what it actually is, it starts to become your folly. It actually starts to be pressing against you, because sometimes systems, they're pretty thick. So today we're going to talk a little bit about our eyesight, a little bit about being blind and actually digging in to learn how to see. And so we're going to spend time in John chapter 9, and we're just going to live here for this message. John chapter 9 is a message of spiritual eyesight. We all know this. We've used it 100 times. This is that story where Jesus miraculously heals a blind man who was born blind at birth. Sometimes I wonder if, it's not our fault that we are blind. Sometimes when you're raised up in things, it's not your fault that we're blind. But you see, then this blind man was given eyesight. And the question is what he does with it is the thing that I think is going to change our hearts today. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" You have to understand that in that time, they just assumed that if you had been born with some sort of abnormality or infirmity, or if you somehow later in life became sick or got leprosy, it automatically meant that there was somehow a sin in your life. But the truth is, this man was born that way, and they still had to ask, is it the sin of his parents or his own sin? Well, did he choose to somehow think something sinful in the womb and God counted that sin against him? No, I think Jesus is making a point here that, you guys are off here. This is not the point of the story. It's not often about just sinfulness. It's often something so much deeper underneath. So Jesus says, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned," said Jesus. "But this happened that the work of God might be displayed in his life." I often wonder, too, as we go through our lives and things come against us, sometimes we are just so quick to assume that it's the enemy attacking us, that it's the enemy pushing us down. We even still fight to this day that somehow maybe even my sin had something to do with this sickness, with this thing that seems to be holding me down. But the idea is that, we know sin does have consequence, don't we? There is natural consequence to sin. So, if we're having an affair with our spouse, we know that there is going to be consequences. You can't hold it against God if your family is destroyed because of the choices that we're making. There is truth to that. But Jesus is even saying here, that's not the point. It's not where we're going with this. Actually, this happened so that God would be glorified, so that you would be able to see the work, see the work of God. As long as it is day, we must do the work of him who sent me. For night is coming when no one can do the work. And while I'm in the world, I am in the light. I am the light of the world. See, Jesus tells us a couple of times that we are the light of the world, and we're also very quick to assume that maybe that just means my presence has a radiance to it. You know, when I walk into a room, it brightens the room because Jesus is in me, or we think that it has something to do with this physical light that comes in. Maybe, you know, we think light is the sun, and it presses out the darkness, it holds back the darkness. But Jesus is talking about something other than this type of light. He's talking about an understanding. He's talking about a spiritual awakening. He's talking about the light actually exposing the thing that's in the darkness. This light is about revelation. You see, so it's not necessarily your fault that you always see Jesus as a white man. It's nothing against you in this moment. But Jesus is laying a foundation with that verse, and he's about to open up some doors that we will have to become responsible for in a moment. He's laying the groundwork for something that is an incredible moment. We often use this story, and we reduce it to a testimonial. And don't get me wrong, as Christians, sometimes we overcomplicate our witness. We overcomplicate our testimony, don't we? We make it about having to make sure we have all the right stuff figured out with our doctrine, with our theology, and heaven forbid I tell somebody the wrong thing. But this story, it lays out that it doesn't have to be difficult. Sometimes all we have to do is say, I was blind, but now I see. And God had everything to do with that. We don't have to lay out doctrine in that. We just get to lay out our experience, this experience that changed our lives. And it's okay for that. But this is going to be so much deeper than this. Don't ever let your testimony be hindered because you haven't quite figured out the theology of God. Because let's just be honest, we got a whole lifetime of not having the theology of God figured out. But when God comes in and changes your life, that's a pretty simple testimony. And we're all called to be able to share that. But he's talking here about a different light. A light that, in my mind, I think is going to blow your mind because it blows my mind. Having said this, then he spit on the ground, he made some mud with the saliva and put it on the man's eyes, and he says, go. He told him, go, wash in the pool of Siloam. This pool of Siloam actually means sent. Not because, I don't think it's because, 1,000 years before when they named this pool Siloam that they knew that God was going to send somebody to this pool. I think it actually has something so much more prophetic to it that through this story, from what Jesus is about to do, that this testimony will be sent into the world. That this testimony will change the world. So the man went and he washed and he came home seeing. His neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, isn't this the one? Isn't this the man who used to sit and beg? Some claimed that he was. Others said, no, he only looks like him. You'd have to imagine, it says in a minute that he was the first person, that this had never been done, that a blind man born blind from birth had never miraculously been given sight. And so you can't blame these people for debating this topic. That, well, he is the man or he isn't the man. I want to believe he's the man because he looks just like him. He has to be the man, but it's never happened before, so he probably isn't. Until he says, no, I am that man. How then were your eyes open, they demanded. Well, he replied, the man they called Jesus, he made some mud, he put it on my eyes, and he told me to go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and then I could see. See, it was also a part of a faithful response to the part of the blind man. You know, Jesus kind of met him halfway. He said, listen, I'm going to do a powerful work in your eyes. And again, keep in mind that just this eyesight, although we kind of make this the primary event of this story, this is just a symbolic gesture of what Jesus is doing under the surface of people's blindness. This is about something so much deeper. And he calls the blind man to go play his part in this. Like, I'm going to do a work, but you got to respond. You have to do something with this. He replied, the man they called Jesus, he made some mud. We just went through that. Just forget I said that. So they brought to the Pharisees the man who had been blind. So something has to be underlying in this, right? Because if you were a Pharisee, I don't care if you were the greatest leader in all of the church, if you had heard of a story of a man born blind having been made able to see, wouldn't you just want to praise in that? Wouldn't you want to just give God glory? Because that's the point. Jesus just said, no, this had happened so that God would be glorified. So wouldn't they want to just give God glory? Because that's the only way this could take place. There has to be something else under the surface. So they brought the Pharisees to the man who had been blind. Now the day which Jesus had made the mud and opened the man's eyes, it was a Sabbath. Here we go. Now we're getting to the problem. Now we're getting to the core of the issue. See, we don't really necessarily care about the miracle now, because no man should be able to heal on the Sabbath. You see, the Sabbath was that battleground for the temple system. The Sabbath was that thing that no matter what comes against us, this is the place we are holding firm. You see, it was about a system over God. It wasn't about God any longer. It was about the fact that this man was starting to disrupt a system that was in place. Therefore, the Pharisees also asked him how he had received his sight. And he goes and he repeats it. He's like, he put mud on my eyes. I'll be honest with you, I had to question that because I heard him spit on the ground. And now my eyes hurt because there's like stones and stuff in them, and it probably smells like spit, and I don't like that smell, but now I see. Some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath. He's talking about Jesus, obviously. But others asked, well, how can a sinner do such miraculous signs? And so they were divided. Finally, they turned again to the blind man. What have you to say about him? After all, it was your eyes he opened. And the man replied, well, clearly he is a man of God. He clearly is a prophet. So now he's starting to make a claim against this system. The Jews still did not believe that he had been born blind and had received his sight until they went to the man's parents. Is this your son? They said. Is this the one you say was born blind? How is it that he can now see? So if somebody says, is this your son? How would you respond to that? You'd say, well, of course he's my son. Of course this kid, he looks a little bit like me. He talks a little bit like me. He smiles like me. Yeah, of course he's my son. But their response was, well, we know he's our son. What does that tell you? It tells you the system has already been at work, dividing this family even. because the temple system was more important to maintaining that status quo to the parents so that they wouldn't be excommunicated from the temple, from the synagogue, from the system. And so this man who was probably considered from birth a sinner, somebody who couldn't be holy, who couldn't be pure, who couldn't be righteous, he would stay and he would beg outside of the temple every day. Why would he have to beg? Because he's not in his home? Because he's no longer under the care of his parents? Because his parents have pushed him out of the family? Because to them, he would have been the thing that would cause them not to be a part of that system. It would have ruffled that. It would have pushed up against that, and they couldn't have it. We know that he's our son, the parents answered. And we know that he was born blind. That's a confirmation. They agree with the system. They agree that he must have been a sinner, because certainly we weren't the sinners. So they couldn't even have this son in their life. That's what this is communicating. But how he can see now, as to who opened his eyes, we don't know. In fact, why don't you ask him, because he is of age? Why don't you ask him? Don't bring us into that, right? Because right now, ignorance is bliss for us. And it's folly for us to be made wise. We would rather keep turning a blind eye to the things that are actually taking place. Because even though we know that's the system, it doesn't seem right. It doesn't feel right to me. We don't want to excommunicate our son. We want our son to be in our home, but we know that can't be the case because we won't be able to be a part of this. And we don't want to be ruffling the feathers, and so they say, put the responsibility back on him. Put the responsibility back on him to make that claim of who Jesus is, because we're not ready. We're not ready to come up against this system that's in place. His parents said this because they were already afraid of the Jews. For already the Jews had decided that anyone who acknowledged that Jesus was the Christ would be put out of the synagogue. And that was why his parents said, he is of age, ask him. And so a second time they summoned the man who had been blind. Give glory to God, they said. We know this man is a sinner. And he replied, this is the blind man now, whether he is a sinner or not, I don't know. The one thing I do know is that I was blind, but now I see. I don't think he's necessarily talking about his eyesight anymore. You see, there's something working here where he's actually beginning to understand the issues that are underlying all of this problem, the system that is in place that they have known for 1,000 years. They have known this for so many generations, and they don't have it in them to start pressing against something they know is no longer correct, because they've had an encounter with Jesus. They've had an encounter with a man who not only opened his physical eyes, but he's also, right now in this moment as we read, he is opening this man's spiritual eyesight as well. And he's beginning to see the thing for what it actually is. He's beginning to see it for the monster that it is. Give glory to God, they said. We know that this man is a sinner. He replied, whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know, I was blind and now I see. And then they asked him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? And now you can start to hear the exacerbation in this man. And he says, I have told you already, and you didn't listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you now want to be his disciples too? See, this guy has already made the choice. This guy has already decided, listen, it's not the way I'm going anymore. In fact, now I'm following the man that has proven to me that this system is false, that this system is actually a false god, that this system is actually idolatry. Can you think of any systems that are in place in our life today? Can you think of the systems of politics that are in place today that we exalt so much higher than a Jesus who you can't unite with these politics? I don't care what side of politics you're on. I know that there are some key issues that we like to tie up to on either side, and it's worth turning a blind eye to the rest, right? That's what we say, because ignorance is bliss. But you see, this is the same picture. Can you see the other systems that have been in place in our country for so many hundreds of years, maybe even 400 years, between the racial divide in our country starting to really bubble up again? The truth is, it's never really disappeared. The truth is, we've just kind of been turning a blind eye to it because we don't want to start pushing up against it, because then it starts to cost you something. Ignorance is bliss for the beholder, but it is not always bliss for the recipient of that ignorance. Do you want to be his disciples too? That's the moment that he made his testimony, actually. That's the moment that he said, listen, you guys are on the wrong side of this thing. You're not going to get it until you experience Christ. And that's when they hurled him out. They hurled insults at him. They threw him out and said, you are this fellow's disciple? Well, we're disciples of Moses. We're disciples of a different system. We're disciples of a thing that has been in place far too long to change. Because we're not willing to put our life on the line to change it. We know that God spoke to Moses. But as for this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from. This cracks me up. Because the blind man now has sight and he answers. Now that's remarkable. You can actually hear the sarcasm coming out of this man. That's remarkable. Because you don't even know where this man comes from. This man that could only do this thing if he was from God, and you don't even know where he comes from, yet it's my eyes he opened. This sinner, this person that you thought you could just throw away, this person that you thought you could just walk past each and every day, this person that you thought that nobody, that God could not want, and yet he's the one who came to me. That's remarkable. We know that God does not listen to sinners. He listens to the godly man who does his will. Nobody has ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. And if this were not from God, he could do nothing. To this they replied, you were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us? And then they threw him out. But his parents were still good. See, we like to measure up to this blind man because his testimony is simple, because it's easy for us to relate to him, because we know we've been born blind. We know we've been born blind to the things that we've been raised in. I wasn't raised up in a home that had racism in it at all. But there were moments. Looking back, I can remember, maybe it wasn't racist in intention, but there were moments where that privilege begins to rise up, that whiteness begins to rise up. It's not my fault. It probably isn't even my parents' fault. They would not even claim an ounce of that, of intention. But yet it's still the way that we see. So we've been born blind, and it's not our fault that we've been born blind. But the truth of the matter is, I think we're actually supposed to identify a little bit more with this man's parents. Because now there's a moment where this light, you remember Jesus says, while I am here, I am the light of the world. I have come to expose the darkness. I have come to expose this monster that's actually lying in the dark. And the parents wanted to remain ignorant because they didn't want to come up against that folly. They didn't want that wisdom. They actually would rather not see, so that they wouldn't have to come up against that system. I think we can identify with his parents, and we have an opportunity here to change our eyesight, to see the world the way Jesus sees the world, to see people the way that Jesus sees people, regardless of what diversity we're talking about here. But I'll be honest, it's important for us because Jesus put this mud in this man's eyes, and then he said, okay, now you need to go and wash your eyes in order to really, truly be able to see. You know, when God called this thing out and he started saying, I'm calling you to knit this community together, and I really had no clue what that meant until he started showing me. But he called me to go and wash my eyes because I was ignorant. And in my ignorance, it is blissful. But he's saying you're no longer able to stay ignorant. You're no longer able to stay in that naivety. Because this thing is too great. This thing has been entrenched in our country for far too long. This thing has been entrenched in the communities of Jackson for far too long. And so we're calling this church to a work that everybody, I'll be honest with you, is going to be naive to. And we're calling all of us to go to that pool of Siloam and go and wash our eyes, because right now Jesus is putting mud in all of our eyes. And it's burning. And it's scratching our eye lenses. But he's saying, this is your part now. Go expose it for what it is. Go wash your eyes so that you can see the depth, the entrenched depth of this system that's in place, that has been in place for 400 years. Go wash your eyes to the politics that you stand by, that you're willing to die by. Go wash your eyes to the fact that you have plenty and there are so many around you that don't. Go wash your eyes to the fact that maybe you weren't born racist. And I don't want anybody to walk out of here saying, I can't believe he called me racist. No, that's not the point. The point is we weren't probably born into racism, but we are definitely born into a prejudice of all people because we see the world through our lens. We can only see Jesus as a white man because that's what we've been taught. Unintentionally, probably. Maybe. Maybe not. The system is pretty deep. So we are being called to go wash our eyes. When I started digging in, I'll be honest with you, when I finally saw what this mission was to knit a community together, I had to expose my own realities. I didn't necessarily want to do it because I didn't know how to do it. I'm not even, probably in my mind, I feel like I'm not even the guy to do it. But as soon as I started washing my eyes and digging in and started peeling those layers back, I realized I'm still peeling the first layer. And how much I have seen, how much I still continue to see. And there are layers upon layers upon layers. And we are being called to go with this light and expose it. And it's going to be difficult. And most of us have no clue of what that even means, including myself. We're just following the Lord, and He is revealing it by His light. Because it is a monster that needs to die. Jesus heard that they had thrown him out. And when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" "Well, who is he, sir?" the man asked. "Tell me so that I can believe in him." And Jesus said, "You have now seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you now." And then the man said, "Lord, I believe." And then he worshiped him. And then Jesus said, "For judgment I have come into this world, so that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind." You see, because right now we have an opportunity. Really, we have a choice. Are we going to be the church that God calls us to be? Are we going to be the church right here in my heart that I understand right now my life, I'm making a choice that my life could stay blissful in my ignorance? Let's just call it naivety, okay? Well, no, let's call it ignorance. Because it's not necessarily your fault, right? Ignorance doesn't mean we're ignorant. Ignorance means we don't just have the information. And the truth is, some of us have chosen to ignore the ignorance. But the choice is today. Either I want to stay blind, or I want to go out and have sight. Some Pharisees who were with him heard him say and asked, "What, are we blind too?" And Jesus said, "If you were blind, you would not be guilty. But now that you claim you can see, your guilt remains." That's crushing. Because I pray that nobody in here walks away making a choice to say, "I would rather be blind." And I don't care what label you want to line that up with, whether it's even your own politics, and I don't care how you vote. I don't care how you vote. You're not going to hear me up here tell you how to vote. I will not do it. That's not the part I play. We are separate from the state. We're meant to stay separate from the state. So I challenge you to question. At least dig in. At least allow yourself to see the exposure of the monster that this system is, what the system of racial inequality, the system of white privilege, the system of politics, and how all of that plays together to keep the system of power in place. Yeah, there might be some policies in each of those systems that could have some goodness in merit. But you see, the system doesn't care about the goodness of those in merit. The system is about staying in power, regardless of what it is. So today here we are starting a series to celebrate with our brothers and sisters that have been on the receiving end of the ignorance of white America. And we're not going to walk out of here having a full picture yet, but we're going to walk out of here saying, "I wish to no longer be ignorant and naive to the things that are happening to my brothers and sisters." We may not be able to change the system, but we certainly can speak out against it. We certainly can stand against it. We certainly can at least be aware of some of the languages I use, some of the tendencies I have. Maybe we can look back at our childhoods and see, okay, my parents, they weren't racist, and it's not their fault. I wasn't racist, it's not my fault. But today I can see that there was, even then, in ignorance. And it was blissful for us on the ignorant side of that, but no longer. God, we just thank you. We thank you for the mission of knitting a community together. A mission that we really don't have a full picture of yet. Maybe we don't ever have a full picture. Maybe that picture continues to evolve. Maybe as we dig in and we allow influence to come into leadership and different understandings to come in so that we are aiming towards wisdom. That we are aiming towards a true picture, Lord. Not for the sake of the picture, but for the sake that all men, all women, every person on this planet, Lord, has an opportunity to kneel at your feet and worship you. That picture that we see in heaven, there's thousands upon 10,000s of people kneeling, people of every nation, people of every tribe, people of every tongue. Lord, that is a picture of reconciliation. That is a picture of a community of heaven knit together by your needle and thread. And you have called us to be reconcilers. And that is the picture of unity. That is the picture of coming together. That is a picture of saying, Lord, we don't know how to do this yet, and we don't care how you call us to do it. We just are going to do it. For whatever part we can play in reconciling the community of Jackson together, beyond racial divide, beyond political divide, beyond economical divide. Lord, show us what that means. Expose that monster in our lives. Expose that by your light. While there is work to do, while there is daylight yet remaining, Lord, you are the light of the world, and you have come to expose and reveal to us the truth. And you have called us to become wise, not remain ignorant. In Jesus' name we thank you. Amen. Thank you for worshiping with us today. We just want you to know that you are now a part of our Found Church family, and you are always welcome at Found Church. We've been worshiping at the middle school at Parkside at 10 a.m. on Sunday mornings, and we cannot wait until we're able to meet back there again. We would also love to hear how God has touched your heart today. If you feel God speaking into your heart in a fresh new way, or believe God to be revealing a new truth to you, or giving you a higher resolution in which to recognize Him, we would love to talk with you and pray with you. Just message us on Facebook or email us at areyoufound.com. And this is my prayer for you today, that this has raised a hope in your heart and helped you to find faith, find freedom, and find the love of God to be overwhelming and real. Be well. God bless.